Good morning, folks. Good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to the Agile Shots from Agile Meridian. We have Mike today. Kumar is taking some time off, much needed time off. And we are in our studios. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning. How are you?
And we're doing well, thanks. What are we talking about today, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great topic. I know, Jolly, this is one near and dear to your heart. And hopefully we'll have a few little tips here at the end that you can do to help yourself as well if you're dealing with the same types of with WIP challenges that a lot of us see and deal with on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, I have been observing this everywhere I go. It doesn't matter which client, right? I mean, Mike, you have been doing this for a long time. I've been doing this for a long time. And everywhere you go, it is a pervasive issue. And it's not just a issue at the team level where they are doing too many things. It's not an individual problem either. It's at the individual level. It is at the team level. Then you take that up to the project, to the program, to the portfolio, to the organization. It's the same problem. Everyone is doing way too much, right? So how do we tackle this problem? It becomes a big issue. I mean, it is easy to tell an individual, don't work on too many things at the same time. But how do you do that when you scale that up to a portfolio, or when you go to the CEO of a company and say, hey, you are doing way too many things. Your company is working on way too many things at the same time. How does that go? So that becomes a real problem. All of these organizations are struggling with it. And they are, my biggest mantra to these folks is to stop starting and to start finishing. How many things you finish is more important than how many things you start.
Yeah, it's about outcomes versus output, right? In this case. And it's interesting because it doesn't matter what the size of the organization is or the age of the organization. You think, okay, size, it's big, it's hard to communicate, it's very siloed. Yeah, that would naturally exist. This happens in smaller, younger companies too, because they're growing, they've got opportunity, they're trying to jump in and take advantage of those things. And you don't want to miss out on that stuff. So while there's different reasons, the reactions tend to be, I guess it's because we're all humans, right? The reactions tend to be very similar, regardless of size, scale, age of company, the space that you're in, the industry, and the competition. These drivers in the marketplace are just continually putting more and more demand to have outcomes that reach and hit things in a smaller window faster. And it tends to make us do that, right? We just put too much in the queue and forget about what we put in last week or last month or 6 months ago. Right. And if those things aren't getting out and we can't see that, we sometimes, I know that you and I talk about this a lot. People don't understand the impact of their decisions. They're not consciously doing this to themselves. Nobody would, but it's more about not being able to see it and not being able to understand the impact of those, of the way that we're working and the way that we're approaching work and how we're stacking it up in these cases, right?
Yeah, and it has been made worse over the pandemic, over the last couple of years, because much of what we do now is hidden. We are out of sight, out of mind kind of problem. We don't know what everyone is working on because they're at home and making use of that time that they have available. They're starting earlier, they're going to sleep later. And in between this, they're doing so many things that not everyone is aware of, right? Which makes this problem even worse at this time. So one of the first things that we tell the people that we work with, our clients, to do is to do what Mike said before, which is visualize the work. And it doesn't mean a Kanban board or a Scrum board, because that is at the team level. Great, right? The team knows what they're doing. Now, at least the people who are working from home have a way of showing what they're working on, which is great, right? But that only solves that individual plus the team problem. This is required at every level, right? This is required at the project level, at the program level, at the portfolio level. Do you have a portfolio board that tracks all the moving pieces, all the different programs, projects that you're working on? to show what is your WIP, what is your work in process, right? So visualizing the work is the first step in this getting better path that we are going to recommend. And Mike, I know you have seen these examples at the
Absolutely. And not just seeing the work that's in process right now to be delivered on the how side, right? It's also seeing the work that's being staged. Seeing what's happening is also saying what's piling up at but before it gets to the how, before the team pulls it in or it gets pushed into the different teams, right? If the maturity level isn't quite there yet. So this idea of seeing the whole, the kind of systems mindset around this, getting those ahas. A lot of times teams don't understand the pressures of what's coming at them by the folks that are being asked to set up big initiatives or new projects or things that are coming down the road because they're so busy in the work. They're so buried in the work. They don't see the pressures and don't understand and realize and appreciate that. And the folks at the front end of the value stream are really struggling to say, I've got 30 things I need to do. We still got the 15 of the 30 we wanted to do before still in flight. How am I going to get all this done, right? So seeing what happens gets everybody aligned around what are we truly all challenged with right now as a whole, and how do we come together to help? How does the one side help the other? How does the what side help the how side and vice versa? Because that visibility is really going to make a difference.
Yeah, I have a great example of a team that I worked with. This was not the big organization, of a team that I worked with. I was kind of helping them visualize the work and maybe move to Kanban if it made sense for them, right? And one of the things that they realized was they had these sprints, they had some work in process, and they didn't meet the commitments, but that's a different issue. But I created a Kanban board for them as a test. Let's see how many things you have in process. Just to remind you, this was not a big team. This was maybe like 6 or 7 people, right? And they set up the Kanban board. They have 50 plus items in dev.
Wow.
60 plus in QA, right? And that is the first time that they have ever seen that. They always thought that their sprint was neat and tidy. They had this is the 10 things that we're working on. But they forgot all of these parallel things that are happening that is still in process and yet to be completed. That was an eye-opening moment for the team as well as me. I was really surprised. I didn't expect so many. So, shame on me in some ways. But I didn't expect that, and they didn't expect that. And that kind of started a conversation of not just to control WIP and minimize everything, the delays, but why are we doing this? Why are we working on so many things at the same time? What caused these things to happen, right? And go down to
how did we get here, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
How did we get here?
Exactly.
And then identifying the root causes of solving that problem. Solving the commitment issue came later, but just solving that, how did we get here problem was their first step, which was a great journey to go through with that team.
Absolutely. And that kind of leads us to our second point in terms of how do you help yourself with this, right? Really helping out, seeing that visibility is great. But when we talk about setting WIP limits, we're setting WIP limits for talent, right? Our capacity is not defined by stages of a workflow process. It's really defined by the people. How much talent do we have to apply to something at any given point in time over a certain duration of time, and how much work do they have, and when's that going to open up, right? Creating this pull system that we all try to help people get to really comes around understanding, well, if Jolly is a modern team member on a modern team where they've got automation scripts going, where they're using BTDD, where they're using modern techniques and a lot of modern approaches, they're involved in multiple columns of what could be their existing process. So they could have WIP limit slots in each column. So if we're only assigning WIP limits to a process or a flow and not considering the people, we're really going to be surprised. We may be setting ourselves up for a disappointing result and saying, why didn't this produce what I was told it would produce? Yeah. Because folks they're multitasking, they're doing more things. Now that's probably a whole nother agile short, right? Around how do you minimize that? But in most cases, when we come into organizations, people have multiple things to do. And in most cases, they always will. So let's make that visible as well. Let's recognize that and make sure the WIP limits as a whole for talent matches up with the fact that we only have so many hours in a week.
Yeah.
And if we're going to be realistic about this, if we're going to really understand our capacity well and start finishing and stop starting, right? As you were saying, get those outcomes out faster.
Yeah.
It's really about the talent's capacity, not the column in the process.
Yeah.
That can be combinized, and you almost feel artificially comfortable because you put this system together. But if you're not taking into account that those people exist on different columns for different purposes because of their work, you could have less than stellar results.
Yeah, and most of the time, that happens. The scenario that you mentioned happens when there is a disparity in the skill level, right?
Correct.
When there are a lot of junior people and there is a very few number of senior experienced engineers or product specialists who have to now multitask across a lot of work that is happening in the
Yes.
team. And then that WIP limit for the talent comes in really handy, not to context switch so many times that you are becoming lesser and lesser effective, right? So that is absolutely right. Most of the time we stick to the WIP limit on the columns or the process, as Mike said, but please do keep this in mind when you're designing these WIP limits. Find a way to visualize it. If it was a whiteboard at work that we already always went to, you could put like magnets with your face on it, or a cute avatar, or something like that. But if you're using a visualization tool like Jira or Rally or version 1, those have ways to do that as well.
Absolutely. And that kind of brings us to the third point, which I think sometimes isn't included in this conversation in WIP, because the WIP conversations are localized instead of being global, like you suggest, Jolly, like looking at it holistically as a system, and having this happen. And this really comes around the idea of WIP limits starting at intake, right? You've got, in fact, I'm working with a client right now. Kumar and I are working with a client where we're talking to the business side of the organization, and we are actively talking about how do we create, what are sensible WIP limits for ideas as they come into the portfolio queue, to say how many things should we be analyzing at once, how many things should we be prioritizing in terms of getting ready for work for the dev teams, and having even WIP limits through the portfolio process so that there's a queue that can come up, but then having that intake queue on the delivery side, of saying, hey, we're only going to take in X, because we know that the due diligence has been on the front end. We know that we have a good understanding of the complexity. Now we know kind of what that WIP limit should be based on our talent capacity. And all of a sudden you've got both sides, a synergistic systems view going with the what and the how, and everything's that you get velocity increase with quality, right? We've seen it happen.
Yeah.
That you get the true benefit, not just on the delivery side, but you think about the what side of the house. The portfolio side is delivering a well-formed idea to be worked on, and then that delivery group has a queue, and they make sure they manage that queue so that they're not artificially taking on too much, which will slow down outcomes.
Yeah, and we always say that that's a good problem to have, right? But it is still a problem to be solved, which is something that
Right.
people just forget. It's a good problem to have. Great, let's all work harder. Is what becomes the default method of solving it. And we have pretty much the same problem in Agile Meridian right now. We have a lot of work to do,
Yes.
and we obviously have not done really well in doing this ourselves. So, a mea culpa there, so to speak. But we are very cognizant. We have talked about limits inside between Kumar, Mike, and I, and we have been actively trying to find ways to manage that. But still, it is a good problem to have, and
Right.
we find ways to solve it, not just by working harder, but by maybe by increasing our talent pool, finding other ways to solve problems rather than just increasing the number of hours that we have to work with the clients. So this is a macro problem, especially when everyone is targeting growth. Small companies like Agile Meridian, I'm pretty sure IBM, Fortune 5 companies have the same problem. But once you manage that intake queue with the talent pool, with the WIP that you can actually sustain at a sustainable pace, then you can have work getting to done faster.
Yes.
And then at a higher quality, and then going after the next set of things, and be confident that you can finish that within a certain time frame.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
and that's where that Kanban really is beneficial, because now you have measurable metrics. You can create those measurable metrics. You can go talk about the improvements. You can talk about, this is where we were when we started, and this is how we progressed. And then that can lead to continuous improvement in very actionable ways, right? So I think it's great. But this is a really good topic. I'm glad you wanted to come up with this one, Jolly, because I know it's a passion of yours, and it's something we all experience.
yeah.
And is there any closing thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, the shameless plug. One of the previous, I think the one right before this was a Agile shot with Kumar and one of our close friends.
Oh, yes.
And it might be a good way of learning how you can visualize backlog refinement. So please do go and check that out. It should be the previous one in our list. Get in touch with us. We are always open for a conversation to get this started for you, to find out better ways of visualizing your work, helping your team, helping your programs, portfolios, and organization manage that WIP and get things done faster. My closing statement is stop starting, start finishing, as Mike said before.
Absolutely. And let's limit the whiplash, because it's frustrating and it's stressful. And we're coming up on the holiday season, so let's enjoy that, right? And get the new year kicked off with a way to really impact our outcomes. And this is where it becomes fun as well as profitable and enjoyable. So thank you, everybody, for attending this Agile Short. We hope to see you again soon, and have a great afternoon.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye-bye. Absolutely.